People ask me, you were in Asia during SARS, and now we have COVID-19. What's the difference? Information, absolutely, in many different ways. Transparency and information.
This is our humble hemp patch.
5,000 years of medical cannabis use.
We're learning about other cannabinoids.
Marijuana is grown in every state in the Union.
I'm Lex Pelger, Director of Education at CV Sciences, and this is the Lex Files. Colonel Dr. Michael Lewis has been studying epidemiology and public health for a long time. He's a soldier, a researcher, a doctor, an entrepreneur, and about a dozen other things. But it all revolves around health, specifically brain health. Formerly, during the Sars outbreak, he was the Department of Defense's Global Emerging Infection Surveillance Program Director, a virus hunter. Now Dr. Lewis spends his time on optimizing brain health, including being on the advisory board here at CV Sciences. His medical practice focuses on the tough issues around brain injuries, and he has a lot of wisdom to share regarding cognitive performance, keeping yourself safe and strong during a pandemic, and even advice on having a good career. This is an important one, so please enjoy this conversation with Colonel Dr. Michael Lewis. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today with Dr. Michael Lewis, retired Army Colonel. Thank you for joining us, Doctor.
Hey, Lex, it's great to be with you today.
I had a first question I really wanted to ask, and just to give everyone a little bit of background, Dr. Lewis is a physician and a researcher and a soldier and an author and an entrepreneur and a speaker. He's an expert on nutritional interventions for brain health, particularly brain injury. He graduated from West Point and Tulane School of Medicine. He's worked at Walter Reed and Johns Hopkins. His private practice, Brain Care, is a comprehensive approach to concussion recovery, brain injury, and brain health issues. He founded the nonprofit Brain Health Education and Research Institute. He's the author of When Brains Collide, What Every Athlete and Parent Should Know About the Prevention and Treatment of Concussions and Head Injuries. He's been seen at most of the top scientific conferences and in the media, including by Dr. Sanjay Gupta. He's currently retired from the military, but he's a consultant to the Army and the Navy, as well as several other companies, including CV Sciences, and continues to publish research and findings around brain health. And so my first question was going to be, with all of that and all these things you've done, and I didn't even cover half of them, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a surgeon. My father was a small town general surgeon, and my mother was a nurse, which is how they met. And I just thought my father walked on water. I mean, the fact that the patients revered him. When I went to medical school, I had every intention of being a surgeon, and by the time I graduated, I had narrowed that down. I was going to go into urology or urologic surgery, and somewhere along the line, I took another turn.
And before we get into med school, you were in the military before that, correct?
I was. I actually took all my prerequisites for med school during my time at West Point. I was a math, chemistry, physics major, which got me the prerequisites. So fortunately for me, I didn't have to go back to school a couple of years down the line. I spent 5 years out in the Army. I was out playing Army for 5 years and had to figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. And I knew that being in the infantry and playing Army was not something that was going to have a long time. It wasn't going to keep me happy for a long time, and realized literally just one day I was like, wait a minute, everything done that I needed to go to medical school. Why am I not doing that? And made that decision and never looked back.
Wow. And how was it for you going from the military to school at a place like Tulane?
Well, first of all, I picked Tulane because it's a great school. For medical schools, you have to interview. You have to go to interviews. I don't know how they do it in today's world, but you have to not just get accepted, but you have to go through a series of interviews for part of that acceptance. And it was clear to me that Tulane was the right place for me. Plus, it's in New Orleans, Mardi Gras. The students were, hey, medical school's hard, it sucks, but we have a good time and we know how to work hard and play hard, which was much more in an attitude that I wanted to be in rather than, medical school sucks and and life sucks.
And so, what was it like to study there and then to move into the different postdoc positions that you had?
Well, medical school, believe it or not, and people might think I'm crazy saying this, medical school is easy compared to West Point and some of the things that I had done in the Army. I mean, anybody that's ever been through the U.S. Army Ranger School, it's 2+ months of absolute hell. And believe me, after West Point and Airborne and Ranger School, medical school actually was relatively easy. It's a lot of information, drinking from a fire hose, but handling the stress of medical school came a lot easier to me than probably a lot of my classmates.
And that would be a practical question. I mean, what did you learn from being at in places like the airborne school and the ranger school and medical school about handling stress and your time and how to deal with things like that?
You just Yeah, I think a huge part of it is individual, but you just have to not take it personally. You realize that it's part of the system. That you let things roll off your back. If you hold on to that anger and that stress, it's just going to eat away at you. You have to move on. You have to um, make a decision that this is not going to bother me because I've got the mission ahead of me and I've got to move on and finish the mission or complete the mission. In a way, it's not dissimilar to playing golf, for example, or playing tennis. Think about golf. You hit a bad shot. If you continue to let that eat at you, the next shot's going to be just as bad. You've got to let it go from one hole to another, from one shot to the next. And if you don't, you're not going to be a very good golfer, or you have a bad, point in tennis. If you don't let that go, you're not going to be a very good tennis player. Well, the same thing in life is you have to let it go. You have to move on and be in the moment and let the past go and get better for the next moment.
That's great advice. And it sounds like it's something that helped you in your career as well, because it sounds like you were in the military for over 3 decades, and it seems like within that structure, you got to be rather entrepreneurial and creative and come up with programs. Could you talk about the programs you came up with about searching for new diseases, the Essence program, and your work in Southeast Asia?
Well, I did a surgical internship at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and back then, because I wanted to go into urology, I had to go out and do general practice for a couple of years, and I got assigned to the Pentagon, and that's a whole fun and interesting, series of stories. But eventually, I figured out that I really like nights and weekends and travel, some stuff that surgeons don't really necessarily know a lot about because they work so hard and so many hours. And so I decided and got really interested in international public health. So that took me to Johns Hopkins and then ultimately to Walter Reed Army Institute of Research to do a residency training in preventive medicine and public health. And while you're there, you have to come up with a project. And one day, my boss came in. It was a late Friday afternoon. I don't know why I was actually still in the office, but I was, and I was the last one there. And my boss walked in. I hadn't seen him all week. I'm like, "Where you been?" And he said, "Well, I was up in New York City. The our operations center in Manhattan." And he told me the story about how they're tracking, and this is 1999, July of 1999, and they told me a story how they're tracking respiratory complaints on 911 calls and mapping that against CDC influenza data. And I'm like, why would they do that? So, well, in case there's a release of anthrax, they want to have an early warning system to figure out. And they think that they can do it a little bit quicker this way. I go, well, what are they doing in Washington, D.C.? We're kind of a big target. And he goes, nothing. And I'm like, well, I need a project for my residency. Let me see if I can think of something. So I actually went back to the Pentagon and tracked down where all the health data went. And it all went to a single server in one place in the country. And I figured out how to tap into that data and ask it questions on a real time basis and map that to see in as far as symptoms. People don't go to the emergency room with a diagnosis. They go to the emergency room with a fever and a cough and a sore throat and with symptoms. And so I figured out how to track these types of visits electronically by the symptoms and determine whether or not there was an abnormality and to the point of pick up the phone and find out what's going on, an early warning system based on symptoms or syndromes. And so that's a program which I thought of, started to look at in July 99. We actually went live with it on the 1st of December 1999 and no money. I mean, I literally cobbled this thing together by finding people who knew what I needed to get done all around the country and put the system together. And we actually went live on the 1st of December. And 2 weeks later, all of a sudden, we see this spike of fevers and respiratory illness. And my boss turned to me like, all right, it's showtime. What do you got? And we picked up the phone, and sure enough, there was influenza. The emergency rooms were being swamped with influenza. And we looked at historic data, 2-3 years worth of historic data, and it mapped exactly like every influenza peak of the last couple of years. And the importance of it was, and it just was 8 weeks earlier than usual. Typically, influenza peaks in February, and this was in the middle of December. And the reason why that was important then, and still I think pretty important now, was at the time, the CDC took 8 weeks to figure out that there was a peak in influenza or the influenza season's here. 8 weeks. We figured it out in 2 days or 1 to 2 days that we could detect an outbreak of influenza or diarrhea or other things within 1 to 2 days. And then my reward for that was I got to pick any assignment that I wanted that was available. And I saw that that the Army, U.S. Army Thai Joint U.S. Army Thai Army Research Lab in Thailand was available, and they needed somebody to develop this brand new global emerging infections program that was being started up at the time by DoD to use these overseas research labs. So I got assigned to Thailand, and my job was to run around Asia looking for partners and develop systems like I had developed with the Essence system and other systems to look for new and interesting infectious diseases. And happened to be there when SARS and bird flu and the huge outbreak of typhoid fever and a disease that hadn't been seen in 50 years, something called scrub typhus, hadn't been really seen since World War II. All kinds of interesting things. So I not only developed systems, but also led outbreak investigations into a number of these things.
And what was that like in terms of both being a doctor scientist and having to work with people with these novel systems you're implementing?
Health professionals really, all around the world, doesn't matter what country, what language, what culture, what religion, they all really want to do good. Doctors don't go to medical school for many reasons. They usually go because they want to help people. And so it was really important to me before I started into a partnership with somebody, and I don't care whether it was a minister of health or a surgeon general of a country or a doctor at a hospital, one of my criteria was I'm not going to get I'm not going to be just funding your research or whatever. I said, if we're going to work together, we're going to be friends first. And for me, that was really important because I want to work with friends. I don't want to work with colleagues. I want to work with friends, people that I know, that I like, and I want to get to know them. Um, and so that was really important to me. And I think it paid huge dividends, not just then, but some of the friendships that I made during that time, I still have very close relationships with those people even today.
What did you do to cope with the stress of being a disease hunter during the time of SARS and other outbreaks?
Well, it was really about information. A lot of people ask me, "What's you were in Asia during SARS, and now we have COVID-19. What's the difference?" Information, absolutely, in many different ways. Transparency and information. So you have to remember, 2003, SARS really kind of escaped out of China, if you will, through Hong Kong. Well, Hong Kong's very different. It's the special administrative region that had just, a few years before turned over from the British to the Chinese, and it was really one country, two systems. It was really very democratic, open society. And so when SARS started to pop up um, in Hong Kong, the world knew about it very quickly and reacted very quickly. The WHO got on top of it, and one of those unsung heroes was a Italian physician named Carlos Urbani, who was working for the WHO in Hanoi, and he saw what was going on coming from Hong Kong into Hanoi and raised the red flag, saying, "Hey, we've got a serious respiratory problem going here." And the world listened to him. And it's unfortunate that Carlos Urbani got sick with SARS himself, flew to Bangkok, and fortunately, one of those unsung heroes was the CEO of a major hospital in Bangkok, who overheard a phone call from Carlos Urbani to I think it was his chief financial officer, saying, "Hey, I've got this SARS thing. I'm coming to your hospital. You got to take care of me." And the CEO said, "Not my hospital." He called the Ministry of Public Health and said, "Meet this guy." They met the airplane. They quarantined everybody. And Carlos Urbani actually died 3 days later on the tarmac at the airport in Thailand. And that one phone call saying, intercept him, when he comes in from Hanoi, saved Thailand from getting SARS. That kind of transparency happened, and it happened early on. Now we got the COVID-19 that, we don't even know when it occurred. We don't know how it occurred. We don't even know the origins of this thing or when it really started, because there's no transparency coming out of Wuhan and out of China. For months, even, it may have been around for, they're saying, okay, maybe it was December. Well, it might be November, might be October. We don't know. It could have been around even months before that. We don't have the transparency, and that allowed it to spread. And once you start this exponential spread, by the time the world really knew what was going on with COVID-19, it was already, the horse was already out of the barn. And it's kind of trying to unscramble an egg. You just can't put it back into the shell. And so we are left with having to deal with it today. And again, it's sort of my philosophy. We can't change yesterday. We have to take an assessment of where we are today, and we have to move forward. We have to live in this moment and plan for the next moment. We can't undo the last moment.
Hey folks, it's sponsor time. The company is Stevie Sciences, the product is Plus CBD, and the discount code for 20% off is Lex Files. And remember, the top 3 reasons to use that code on pluscbdoil.com. Number 1, I would give Plus CBD to your grandmother, because I gave it to my grandmother. Number 2, I was the biggest skeptic. Then I started studying the endocannabinoid system. Number 3, I know firsthand that CV Sciences is committed to pure science and to enhancing well-being. So when you find yourself in need of CBD from true agricultural hemp, consider Plus CBD, the #1 CBD brand in the United States. That coupon code is Lex Files, and the place to use it is pluscbdoil.com. And so with that philosophy, what would you say to people who are listening who are very scared of this pandemic? What practical steps would they take to take care of their own physical health, but also their mental health, of the anxiety around this?
Well, I think the anxiety has just completely overwhelmed and consumed our society here in America. It's just, and really around the world. It's so sad. Um, one of the things that we can go in so many different directions with this. Um, One of the questions is, why is the U.S. being hit so hard? Uh, and are we being hit so hard? I mean, everything from, are tests valid, and how are we coding people? Somebody dies in a car accident, but they tested positive for COVID. Is that a COVID death? I mean, all these crazy questions that we don't really have answers, and we don't know who to believe, which then feeds into more anxiety. So, anxiety is a very personal thing. You have to take personal responsibility for your own anxiety. And so, whether or not you believe, that masks should be worn or whatever, you have to take personal responsibility for your health. And I think one of the reasons why we're seeing such bad disease in the US is we're a really unhealthy population. The amount of obesity, a major risk factor for bad disease, the amount of allergies and respiratory disease, and just these diabetes, these comorbidities. We're a really unhealthy population in the US, and that's, I think, in my opinion, one of the reasons why we're seeing such bad amounts of COVID-19. Um, and it's really sad, because it gets back to personal responsibility. It's, why are you 50 pounds overweight? And we're a victim of our own success in some ways. I look at, the last 70, 80 years. We went into World War II, and we, took care of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. The greatest generation, really answered the call when the world was in peril. And we took that energy, and it came out of World War II with, new use of antibiotics, which looked like it was curing infectious diseases everywhere. Roll back malaria, the WHO program really knocked down malaria and dengue fever and all these mosquito-borne diseases, and that was a huge success. So much so that they stopped funding it, and you know that's come back over the last couple of decades. We got into immunizations, polio, and we eliminated smallpox. And you know now we put a man on the moon, and there's nothing we couldn't do as Americans. We could out engineer even nature, which is an absolute fool's errand. um, I say nature, just when we think we are handling nature and we've got this under control, nature just reaches back and slaps us right upside the head. And I think that that's happening with COVID-19, is that we think that we can out engineer nature, and we can live an unhealthy lifestyle, and we can eat whatever we want, and we can do whatever we want. And we're going to figure out a magic pill or a magic shot that's going to make me lose 50 pounds or keep me healthy, instead of taking personal responsibility for our health. And that hugely affects our immune system and our immune function and our ability to respond to infections. Think about one of the things that's going on right now. I mean, at first it was, we need to flatten the curve. We need to not allow our medical systems and our emergency rooms to be overrun. Well, that's great. We did that. But what did we do? We said, well, we can conquer this disease if we just keep everything shut down. And, you got the mayor of Los Angeles coming out and saying, we're not going to open Los Angeles until there's a cure for COVID-19. That's absurd. Viruses have existed long before mankind. They're going to exist long after we're gone. We have to coexist with them. And so to shut the world's economy down um, is just absolutely insanity to think that you are going to keep people from getting the virus. All we're doing is prolonging the agony. I like the George Carlin stand up from a number of years ago where he talks about you've got an immune system, and the only way you can exercise your immune system is giving it exposure to germs. So if we sanitize everything, which is exactly what we're going through right now, we want to sanitize everything. Nobody's going to be exposed to germs. You got kids not going to school, so they're not mixing their germs with other kids. Nobody's going to, we're going to create a generation that doesn't have an immune function, an immune response to diseases when they really need it. And so I just think we are setting ourselves up for long-term failure with our short-sighted thinking. And part of that is based on we've been so successful as a country and as a society for the last 7,500 years that we think we can out-engineer Mother Nature. It's just not going to happen.
And so it's good to hear. So as a new parent, your philosophy is a little bit, let them eat dirt.
Absolutely. Kids, should be outside playing. If you're not comfortable letting them run around the neighborhood, and you can garden, help get them helping with the gardening. Yeah, let them let them eat dirt. You drop something on the ground. If it, pick it up and eat it. I mean, there's certainly obviously some things that we can do for common sense, but bottom line is, when we look at any school system anywhere in the world, when they go back to school, and we'll pick sort of the usual, in September, and then of course after the winter holidays in January, kids get sick. They get fevers because they've been running around the world. They come back into a closed environment of a classroom, and they share all these germs, all these viruses that they've collected from running around with family around the world, and they get sick. That is exercising the immune system. And if we completely eliminate that, what are we going to create? We're not going to be able to escape these things the rest of our life. We can't live in a bubble. And that's exactly what we are trying to do with everything from, you know, uh, 15, 20 years ago, a big talk was about antibiotic soap. Are we creating super bugs with all this antibiotic soap and, hand washing? Now it's important. Hand washing is important to use soap, but if it's this specific, antimicrobial soap, are we creating antibiotic resistance in bacteria and bugs? Maybe that's part of the reason why we're seeing some of the issues now. But it's going to be even worse down the line. And that's not even getting into the whole social aspect, the whole financial, the whole economy aspect of it. For every bit of unemployment that goes up, the amount of suicides and the amount of mental health and the amount of the decrement to our lifespan goes down for every percentage of unemployment because people need things to do. And even where I live in a pretty wealthy suburb of Washington, D.C., we have teenagers committing suicide because there's no hope because we've shut down the schools and they can't socialize. They can't go to the mall. They can't, they've already canceled fall sports and even winter sports. And yet we're in an area that's really not one of the hotspots of COVID-19. What is that going to do to our social growth of our young children and our teenagers? I fear for this country and I fear for this generation, what they're faced with because of the overreaction. What we're seeing. I'm not saying COVID-19 is not a serious disease. It's killing people, obviously. It's a very serious disease, but we have to take a more realistic approach that we're not going to eliminate it. We're not going to cure it. We're not going to I don't even think we're going to have an effective vaccine against it. We're going to have to live and coexist with it.
It reminds me of something I read in Daniel Defoe did his book about the last great outbreak of the Black Plague in London. And when the plague was raging in Eastern London, life went on in Western London. It's in these neighborhoods and, that's the places that would shut down and the rest of the city just went on living. And it's kind of remarkable to think about it that way, but it's how the world is currently operating. And there's nothing black and white about it. I think that's what makes it so difficult. It's all these nuanced responses of how much to open up, how much to do. Where's our balance here in our response?
Well, and look at Sweden. Sweden, has gotten criticized that they didn't shut down and that they had, higher deaths and death rates than, say, Norway and Finland and so on around them. But now all of a sudden we're starting to see that the amount of disease and particularly acute and severe disease in Sweden is significantly less than their neighbors. And now all of a sudden they're looking like, hey, wait a minute, maybe they did the right thing. And they kept their younger kids in school and they kept their society functioning and social interactions going. And they didn't get overwhelmed, but they also didn't overreact by shutting everything down. One of the things that I've always looked at is, when New York was having a serious problem, why was everything shut down in, say, Utah or New Mexico, where, there's very few cases in a lot of places, Park City, Utah shut down completely, and that whole county had no cases of COVID. Well, did they think they were going to just prevent it? You're never going to prevent this disease from progressing. That's already done. That horse is out of the barn, as I said. If we didn't catch this early on when you can do good diagnostics and contact tracing, then it's too late. And we've taken a very strange approach worldwide. This is not just the United States, worldwide. And the idea that, throughout history, what you did is if somebody was sick, you isolated them and you took the people that were closely around them, contact tracing, and you quarantine those people that might have been exposed to see if they become ill. The word quarantine comes from the Black Plague in Venice, where ships would come into the port and they would make them anchor for 40 days before they allowed them on the shore. And in some cases, they were fine. In some cases, pretty much everybody on the ship died. But it was 40 days. That's where the word quarantine comes from the Italian for 40. And we've taken a very opposite approach here. We are quarantining healthy people and isolating healthy people, trying to keep them from getting the disease. It's never been done in the history of mankind. And it's completely backwards, completely reverse from everything I was ever taught about epidemiology and how to deal with infectious diseases. And yet this is how the world has reacted. It's absolute insanity in my mind.
Wow. Well, that's depressing. all the people.
Hey, you wanted the bare truth from me, right?
Yeah, and it's great to hear that from someone who is trained in this art that is a science. I mean, I think it's the hard part about public health is that there's no it's always a balance. There's no right or wrong here.
There's no one right answer. There's absolutely no one right answer.
And so I appreciate this on the negative sides of what are going on in the world, and I actually wanted to end on some of the more positive work that you do. Because one of your most requested lectures is called Peak Performance, A Doctor's Guide to Executive Brain Health. And you talk about how to about trying to cope with the symptoms of stress is the wrong strategy. And the goal is to try to optimize your brain for creativity and focus and balance. And so I just wanted to ask, what are some of the most important tools that we could use for that kind of optimization of your own brain?
The two most important things are the things that we have been told time and time again that are the most important things that we should always do, whether you're talking about optimizing brain health or keeping your immune system strong to be able to withstand this virus or fight it if you do get it, is the basics. Eating healthy and good daily exercise. And along with that, kind of the corollary to that is getting a good night's sleep. But that really can stem very much from eating healthy and getting good, regular, intense exercise. We've become, a society of sitting and lethargy and, not moving a whole lot. I love the Fitbit and the other things that, the goal of 10,000 steps today. Well, that gets people a little bit more competitive. I haven't gotten my 10,000 steps in today. That's great. We need more movement in our life. Um, but most importantly from all that is really eating healthy, a diet, based more in fruits and vegetables and lean meats and particularly seafood. Think Mediterranean diet. That's really the only diet that's ever been shown to be good for your cognition, for your brain health. And I would add to that underlying, we need to look at our hormone function, particularly if you've had any kind of a concussion or brain injury over your life. How are your hormones holding up, and can we address those? But then the last sort of really pillar of good health, in my opinion, is good targeted nutritional supplementation. I think that there's some great supplements out there that can help keep our immune system optimized. And when you optimize your immune system, you're also optimizing your brain function. Think omega 3s from fish oil are huge. Um, what we could do a whole different lecture on just fish oil. Think about CBD and how that interacts with not just our immune function, but also our brain function. And then how do they work together? Because what I'm finding is that using fish oil and CBD, hemp extracts, the synergy between the two is phenomenal. And it really can make a life changing difference for somebody that's trying to optimize their brain health or recover their brain health after it's taken a hit.
And it's interesting because not everybody is aware that the endocannabinoids that we produce, the building blocks are fatty acids as well. And there's something about these lipids, these fatty acids, that seem to be key for keeping the brain functioning well.
Absolutely. I mean, so if you think about the two, well, the best known endogenous cannabinoid is anandamide or bliss molecule. It's made from and broken down into arachidonic acid and omega 6. And the downstream effects of omega 6s and of arachidonic acid in particular are pro inflammatory and prothrombotic, meaning your blood clot. It promotes clotting of your blood. Well, it's inflammation and clotting your blood. Well, blood is a balance, right? You need it to clot if you have a cut and things like that, but you need to not let it clot so that it continues to flow through your system. Um, the same thing with inflammation. Inflammation is life. You have to have inflammation. It's how we repair our bodies. But you have to resolve that inflammation, and that's what omega 3s do. So it's a balance between omega-6s and omega-3s. Well, when you add in, particularly, I'll pick on CBD for a second, cannabidiol. Um, CBD blocks the enzyme that breaks anandamide down back into arachidonic acid. So it keeps our happy molecule around longer. Well, if you think about it, if it does that for omega-6s, does it do it for omega-3s? And it absolutely does. And so the analogous structure for anandamide on the omega-3 side is something that's been nicknamed synaptamide, which is basically helps our brain cells grow more branches and synapses, helps rebuild the brain. And so adding CBD keeps that synaptamide around longer. It's an inhibitor that keeps the synaptamide around longer, just like it keeps anandamide around longer. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such, as a clinician, that's one of the reasons why I'm seeing such synergy between CBD and hemp derived broad spectrum hemp oil with CBD and omega-3s, because it's helping not just the synaptamide part of things, but it's also helping keep us happier with the anandamide side of things. And it's all really meant to just be a balance. The problem is our society has become so out of balance with how we eat. Gets back to diet and exercise. That's how we interact with our endogenous cannabinoid system, is through diet and exercise, eating healthy and regular exercise. That's how we keep ourselves happy, healthy, and our immune system and our brain function healthy and strong.
I think that'll be great for a lot of people to hear. They think of a high level brain expert like you, and they think high level interventions and, crazy drugs and modalities. And you're suggesting, diet, health, fish oil, and CBD.
Well, sometimes we have to get back to the basics. And, you asked me at the very beginning, why did I get into medicine? And it's, like everybody, I would hope everybody that gets into medicine is because you want to help people. And, I had a great role model growing up. My father was really a very unusual general surgeon, and that he very much looked at the health of an individual and outside the box type of thinking. I mean, he believed in vitamins long before it ever became popular. And he would talk about, during his training in the late 1940s, actually, where he would do a knee operation or a back operation or spine operation, and he would make the patients walk back from the operating room back to the room, because he knew that getting them up and ambulating was really important. And it took medicine 40, 50 years to figure that out when he was doing it back in the 40s. So great role model to be able to, not be tied down by the medical dogma, but to think what's right for people and what makes common sense. And that's the approach I've always tried to take.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing about your approach today. It was really a great conversation.
Oh, my pleasure, Lex. And, I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunity to do this more, and plenty more to talk about.
Absolutely. This is Dr. Michael Lewis, retired Army colonel, and his book is When Brains Collide, What Every Athlete and Parent Should Know About the Prevention and Treatment of Concussions and Head Injuries. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in. To listen to other episodes, find us at pluscbdoil.com/Lex Files. If you have any questions, compliments, or suggestions, feel free to write me at research@cvsciences.com. If you enjoyed the program, please rate us on iTunes and share a link to your social media. It means a lot to us. The Lex Files is produced by Matt Payne. Our chief advisor is Amabel Dela Cruz. The music is by Jake Bradford Sharp. Our sponsor is CV Sciences, maker of America's favorite CBD oil. And remember the coupon code LEXFILES. I'm Lex Pelger, signing off.